Hi, everyone. Welcome to CurePSP's Ask the Expert webinar. I'm Jessica Shurer. I'm the Director of Clinical Affairs and Advocacy here at CurePSP, and I'm so glad to be here with you today moderating this program. We are fortunate to have two experts with us today who will be helping us to understand brain donation for neurodegenerative diseases. A few notes before we introduce them and before we get started. This program will be about an hour long. We are recording this webinar live, but it will also be archived on our YouTube channel and our Facebook for anyone to view later. A copy of the slides and a link to the recording will be emailed to those who had pre-registered. Our two experts will likely address many of your questions throughout their presentations, and we realistically won't be able to get to everyone's questions. But still, you're welcome to type your questions into the comment section of the platform that you are using to view this live. We will also be referring to the questions that many of you had submitted when you registered, and thank you for sending those in. We got some good ones. We always recommend not sharing personal health information in the comments section of the platform where you're reviewing this, and we encourage you to talk to your healthcare team if you have specific and personal medical concerns and questions. We are also here as a resource for you. If we don't get to your questions today, email us at info@curepsp.org, or if you have more personal or specific questions to ask about this topic. You can also use the comment box to say hi, and if you want, where you're tuning in from today, if you'd like. It's always nice to see how we have people watching this from all over. Today's topic is the legacy and science of brain donation for progressive supranuclear palsy, corticobasal degeneration, and multiple system atrophy. CurePSP is very proud to offer a brain donation assistance program. When someone donates their brain through our program, not only does the family receive a comprehensive report on the findings, including the pathological diagnosis, but the brain tissue is also used and studied by scientists all over the world. It's really a very powerful way to contribute to the understanding, treatment, and cure of these diseases and related neurodegenerative diseases. I have seen many families use this over time, and I have a lot of experience with that, and they all share how incredible it was to have that as part of their legacy. So we'll be speaking to that. I just want to acknowledge again before we get started that I recognize this is not a fun or easy topic, so I really just want to commend all of you who are watching it for being proactive and being open to learning. I also want to share that information on our program and the packet itself, where you can also read all the details about the process and the steps that need to be taken can be found on our website, and we'll be putting the link to that in the chat here if you're watching this live. At this time, I would like to introduce our two speakers and have them join me up on the screen here. Today, we have with us Dr. Gabor Kovacs, who is a professor in the Department of Laboratory Medicine and Pathobiology at the University of Toronto and is co-director of the Rossi Program for Progressive Supranuclear Palsy Research, which is a CurePSP Center of Care. And he is joined by Diane Crompton, who is a former PSP care partner. Diane and I go way back. We've known each other for a number of years, back from our North Carolina-based PSP and CBD support group for my life at CurePSP, where I also had the honor of knowing her lovely husband, Mark. So the structure of our webinar is going to be a little bit different today since we have two speakers. First, Dr. Kovacs is going to start by explaining brain donation and how the brain tissue is used in research of neurodegenerative diseases. And then Diane is going to tell us about her personal experience with the decision and the process. And then all three of us will be here. We're going to open it up for questions, and we're going to have a conversation around it. So thank you both for being here. And with that, Dr. Kovacs, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jessica, and to those who are watching and listening, it is an honor to meet you in this web forum, and it is an honor and pleasure to present a brief overview what is really going on when we are examining the human brain and what is the relevance for you who are considering and want to understand what is exactly a brain donation. So I will drive you through these points. First, I would like to summarize the basic concepts of PSP and other disorders, which we call as neurodegenerative diseases, so that you understand better why we can contribute better to the understanding of these diseases. I would like to then ask the question, why is neuropathology important, and convince you why it is. Also, what is exactly a brain donation, and also what examinations are we performing or can be performed. And then I will draw a few conclusions. So first of all, most of those who join this forum, which is organized by CurePSP, have a kind of interest in diseases abbreviated as PSP, CBD, and MSA. And these are less frequent neurodegenerative diseases that are associated clinically with some kind of movement disorder or some kind of cognitive disorder. The abbreviation PSP is for progressive supranuclear palsy. The abbreviation for CBD is corticobasal degeneration, and the abbreviation of MSA means multiple system atrophy. I would like to show you here an image that we see in a human brain if we put under the microscope, and this is an image taken from a healthy individual. So we see different types of cells, and this is the gray matter where we kind of get our nerve cells and that contribute to our functions throughout the body. However, in diseased brains, in neurodegenerative disease, there is a loss of nerve cells in certain brain areas. And in addition to that, and this is the knowledge of the last 20 years, there is accumulation or deposition of abnormal proteins. Abnormal protein means that this is a pathologically altered protein, but we do have it in healthy version also, but in disease it changes and it becomes a pathological protein. Now on the left side of the screen you will see brown colors, and you see that different shapes of these brown colors. Now these represent the abnormal pathological protein depositions in the human brain. And I would like to show you here that with neuropathology, we are able to visualize and examine these pathologically altered proteins under the microscope. As you see, there are a lot of different cell types in our brain, and these proteins will be seen in showing different shapes in these nerve cells. And this is exactly how we work, how we map these pathological alterations and translate it to a diagnosis. Now let me focus more now on these major groups that we are addressing today. So the most important new discovery is that proteins characterize specific diseases. For example, Parkinson's disease and multiple system atrophy are characterized by abnormal deposition of a protein called alpha-synuclein. Progressive supranuclear palsy and corticobasal degeneration are characterized by a protein called tau. Now, I would like to drive you through very briefly, very easily about emerging concepts that drive our research around the world. First of all, the first major novelty is that these neurodegenerative diseases are called misfolded protein diseases. This means that the normal form of the protein is changed. It takes another shape, and this other shape is a pathological, not normal shape, and this will block the function of the nerve cells and the communication between the cells. The bad shape, if it meets a good shaped protein, will change the good to bad. So this means that there is a seeding effect meaning that the bad will change the good to bad and accumulates only the bad. Another concept is that these bad proteins are able to jump to cell, and this means that they will involve the brain in a sequential manner, distribute throughout the brain, and this is why there is a clinical progression. There is always a progression of the clinical symptoms. The third concept is that as we age and because we are individuals, we can have a mixture of different bad proteins, which will have an effect on the clinical presentation. Finally, we have new methods to visualize these bad proteins on an atomic level. It's in an unimaginable small level, and understand how these proteins look like. This is very important if we want to develop therapies. This is a summary of what I have said. You see this little worm-like structure of a normal protein, which changes to this sheeted pleat structure, which is the bad form. These forms can be different, and they will jump cell to cell in a different speed. Some will be fast, some will be slow, and involve brain regions this or that way, and this will lead to differences in the clinical presentation and the progression. An important aspect that we have a method that uses this seeding concept. So if we want to visualize bad proteins, if we give good proteins, the bad will change in the Petri dish or the tube, the good to bad, and then we can diagnose the presence of a bad protein. This is called protein seeding assays. And let me emphasize that without brain donation, this method would have never been invented or used, because this was developed using human brains, but now it is translated to body fluids and to tiny skin biopsies in living patients. So of course, we first have to start with examining the human brain, but as you see, this is an excellent example that you can then, in a few years, translate it to a diagnostic method which can be used in living patients. This is just a schema to show you how the bad proteins are jumping from cell to cell. And indeed, some cells are successful to put these bad proteins into a cage, which we call an inclusion body, and we can visualize this in the microscope and then study those cells and compare them to those which are not able to put the bad proteins into a cage. Finally, I would like to show you that we are humans, but we are individuals, which means that we are not the same. So there might be patients with the same clinical phenotypes who have a mixture of different bad proteins. And finally, this is the so-called cryogenic electron microscopy, which allows us to visualize in an atomic level the structure of these bad proteins, which means that we can tell the therapy development which little key will fit to which keyhole to block the changing of the good to bad protein. Now, with this introduction, I hope you see that why neuropathology is important. First of all, we cannot study animals if we want to understand what is going on in human brains, because we are still a very distinct species, and we have to understand what is going on in humans. We have to study human brains. We just cannot avoid that. I would like to show you two examples. Currently, the most used and the best therapy currently for Parkinson's disease is giving dopamine to the patients. This helps to relieve symptoms. It does not cure the disease, but it helps to relieve the symptoms. Why do we use this? Dopamine is used because more than 60 years ago, human brains were studied, and it was found that in Parkinson's disease human brains, there is a loss or lack of dopamine. This is why they started to give dopamine. Without studying a human brain, this would have never been achieved. Also, the reason why we are talking about PSP as a disease entity, is because it was evaluated using microscopy or so-called neuropathology, and it has been found that this is completely different under the microscope than other neurodegenerative diseases. Now let me talk about PSP. In PSP, not only the nerve cells are affected, but also the supporting tissue, which we call glial cells. Everything what is brown or black colored here shows the pathological accumulation of a bad protein, which is tau. Now, the same or similar microscopic changes we can observe in patients with different clinical presentation. Still, we call these patients having PSP, but some of them have this type of symptom as first, some of them had another type of symptom as first. And clinical researchers have identified at least 8 different clinical presentation of PSP, whereas under the microscope we see relatively similar changes. We discovered that the different cell types process the bad protein in a different way, and that is why there are differences between the patients. We developed a staging system, and we hope that this can be translated to living patients to monitor the stages of the disease or response to therapy. Now, let me then finally go to what is brain donation to address the question. Now, brain donation is the nicest gift you can think of if you go through a very difficult period seeing your family member in an uncomfortable disease, and you want to help, but unfortunately you are probably not able to help your family member in this sense, but you will help the understanding of the disease, and you will help to future patients to have a better opportunity to be cured or have a better quality of life. So altogether, donating the brain for research is a gift from you, and this will support our knowledge about the disease. But in addition to this, another very important reason is that you finally get a precise diagnosis. And we also provide a feedback to the clinicians. So this is a kind of a quality control to the clinicians. And you also receive a detailed diagnosis. You get this provides a peace of mind that you understand what exactly was going on in the brain of your family member. You understand the symptoms better, and then this helps you to kind of process the uncomfortable situation. Indeed, a scientist in the 18th century said, and this is quoted several times for medical students, that actually an autopsy is where the death delights to help the living. So this is the place where we help the future, the living persons. Studying human brains. So first of all, we can examine the so-called anatomical involvement, so which regions are first affected. If we understand, for example, what is the first affected nerve cell or brain area, then we will understand what goes wrong at the first step. It will be easier to develop a therapy. We can map the proteins. We can address the topic, what can be a therapy target. We can understand other crucial aspects contributing to the disease, such as inflammation. We can understand how genes influence the disease, or how cell types behave and process the bad proteins. And also we can address why the clinical symptoms were this or like that, and why the clinical progression was this or like that. let me show you a slide how this looks like. So this is a human brain fixed in formalin, and these are slices of the human brain. And for the neuropathological diagnosis, we have to cut several relatively large blocks, which we put in paraffin and cut very thin sections that we can examine under the microscope and map the pathological changes. So when we reach the neuropathological diagnosis, we also provide a list of concomitant pathologies, and we identify the affected and the non-affected brain regions and cell types. And then researchers from around the world, or with very complicated methods, such as evaluating hundreds and thousands of proteins called proteomics, or hundreds and thousands of genes called genomics, or hundreds and thousands of RNA molecules that translate the genetic information to protein, called transcriptomics, or biochemistry to evaluate the chemistry of the bad proteins. These are what we can use, what we can examine using the human brain tissue. But for all of these, as a first step, we need the neuropathological diagnosis, we need the neuropathological description. So in summary, we perform research on neurodegenerative conditions using postmortem human brain tissue because many questions still remain to be answered. How to prevent, how to cure these diseases, how to stratify patients for therapy trials, or how to stratify patients for already existing therapies, and altogether to pave the path for individualized therapies. Not to give the same little tablet for every patient, but to say that for this group of patients, maybe we give another type of tablet than to the other group of patients. For this, we need to understand that these human diseases much better using human brain tissue. What is the first step for a brain donation? First of all, you identify the local responsible person. So you are visiting a clinic, and then you identify whether they offer brain donation, or if not, you identify another university or another center which offers brain donation. You identify the responsible person and contact them. Then you can bring your questions to the next visit if your physician can help with that. What can you expect after a brain donation? You can expect feedback upon request. You can expect always transparency and respect, and commitment to research and ethics. So the driving concept is always commitment based on discretion, empathy, patience, respect, transparency, and ethics. And finally, a feedback towards the family. This is just a nice image provided by my colleague Shelley Forrest, which shows that here we can, for example, just as an example, we can visualize many, many different proteins in the same brain using different colors. And this was just to show you how this can look like. And I would like to thank you for your attention. And as in the universe, also our human brain contains a lot of secrets which we cannot discover without the support, with the incredibly valuable support of brain donation, which is the best gift that you can consider. Thank you very much. And if you are interested in our research, you can visit our homepage. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, that was such helpful information. I mean, knowing that, like, how it's actually used, how it's been helpful in actually understanding these diseases as well as other diseases and finding treatments. Thank you so much, Dr. Kovacs. And we're going to get into more of that soon as we answer people's questions. Now I'd like to introduce Diane Crompton, who's with us today. And hi, Diane. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Jessie.
Hey, so her presentation is going to be a little different. It's just going to be a conversation between the two of us about her experience. And Diane, before we get into the questions, I'd love if you could briefly introduce yourself and the journey that you went through with your husband, Mark.
Yeah, sure. And first of all, I want to thank Dr. Kovacs because I think without the scientific kind of clinical backbone to what I'm going to be speaking to, what I'm saying would not be as informative. So I think that was very helpful. My husband Mark got a diagnosis back in 2015. We were living in Atlanta at the time, and I kind of feel lucky, in close quotes, that we got an early diagnosis because it is a tricky disease to diagnose. We did get got a second opinion through Emory, which is it's a research-based institution, much like our local institution here, Duke or UNC. It answered the question of what is going on, but then it was like, what do we do now? Mark actually ended up passing away from the disease in 2018. And the last 2 years was a very rapid progression. I mean, I often use the analogy of it's like a out of control locomotive. You know, you're constantly trying to stay ahead of the rapidly deteriorating capability of your family member, and the clinical symptoms that the thought is often, you know, is this going to be it, or is this just a hiccup, you know, or is this going to be the new normal for the time being? Mark had a lot of vitality prior to diagnosis, and he was a self-professed jock. So we spent a lot of our time athletically, hiking, golfing, tennis, and whatnot. So the disease was especially painful because it does rob physical capability and a lot of other bodily functions from individuals.
Thank you for sharing that history and your journey with it, Diane. I remember Mark very fondly, and he was a spitfire of a gentleman, but I remember him being very committed to wanting to participate in research. And if I recall, it was relatively early on the diagnosis that he decided he wanted to donate his brain. So I'll shift us into that. And if you could tell us, like, at what point did you learn about brain donation and discuss it, and maybe even who introduced that subject to you too?
Mm-hmm. Well, we did end up, after receiving the diagnosis, moving to be closer to family here in the Piedmont section of North Carolina. And we got affiliated clinically with Duke University and the Neurodegenerative Center there. And through that, and I would say just as importantly, through direct involvement with our local and statewide PSP support group, both those things coming together provided a lot of information and kind of ongoing messaging around, like, hey, you know, brain donation is something that could really, it might be a path to providing information for a very out of control disease state that would be really valuable, you know. So it was through both those parties that we were introduced to the idea of brain donation, and certainly the CurePSP as a kind of a backbone resource throughout all of this for us, which was another complement to everything else we were hearing about brain donation. And so about a year into diagnosis, Mark drove it. Mark drove this decision, and that he said, you know, I want to donate my brain. So then it became a conversation between Mark and you know, us as a couple with the neurodegenerative team, and you know what we needed to do to make sure that happened. And if we had any other questions too, CurePSP was a great resource as well. And we had other individuals who had done the same thing, and they were able to provide us with some anecdotal information, which was also very helpful.
What were as you were introduced to it and you started learning about it and asking questions, what were the primary reasons that ultimately he decided to pursue brain donation?
Well, for Mark, it was he wanted to provide he knew that only through brain donation could there be some valuable science behind not only diagnosis. I mean, I would say that the diagnostic aspect of the brain donation was secondary for him. What was more important was the ability to provide a vehicle for future research to be made for the cure, treatment, diagnosis of the disease. That was the biggest driver for him. And the secondary to that was actually there's three things. Secondary to that was the ability to get a diagnosis, but he had passed. Once he passed on, he never knew, of course. But we can talk about that pathology later. We did get a diagnosis, which was very helpful to myself and extended family. And then thirdly, and I think this is important too, that these neurodegenerative diseases are rapidly progressing. And there is in large part a sense of loss of control because it's going to happen. It's just when is the next shoe going to fall, with the clinical progression of the disease. And so it gives the individual and also the family something that they've chosen, that they've said, this is what I want to do. And it gives them a sense of control that, I'm making this decision. And that can also be extremely valuable, especially with diseases that are this challenging.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, something that I need to highlight in that is that, like you said, he drove the decision, but that he was part of that and very early on. I'll tell you from my experience working with people making this decision for a decade at this point, more often than not, it happens. It's a decision made by the family, and it's usually when someone is pretty actively passing. So it's a very quick decision, and it's in this time of high emotions and sort of crisis moment. So the fact that you were able to have that time to talk through it and learn about it and educate one another and educate other people and get all of your ducks in a row, and it gave him this sense of like, I'm giving back in this way. This is something I can control, is huge. And I love that he had that opportunity.
Yeah, Jesse, you were absolutely right. And I am affirming what you're saying. And I think that it's not a ding against any family members to kind of be under such duress. They do wait till the 11th hour. But as an individual, I'm encouraging anybody who's interested in brain donation that as discomforting as it may seem to talk about it, the best time to talk about it is early, when you're not in crisis management mode, because frankly, you've got a lot of other things on your plate at that time. And this is there are some sensitivity attached to the logistics of the brain donation. And having been through that process, I felt liberated that we had all our ducks in a row when Mark did pass, because there are things that need to happen fairly quickly. So I think it is important to, if you're kind of kicking the idea around, do it early. Talk about this early with yourself, your family members.
And if I could just add one little anecdote there, and by the way, my dog just came in and then shook, so apologize for dog sounds next to me. But I just want to stress to folks watching this too, who had a lot of questions around like the process and steps, that you can make the decision, get all of the paperwork, take all of the steps, get everything in order. And I've had people where in the 11th hour, when someone passes, for whatever reason, the brain donation doesn't work out, or the family says, you know what, we set this up, but we're deciding in this moment that we don't want to do it anymore. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be set in stone. And I think that's an important message, because that sort of can take a little bit of the pressure off of like, if I decide this now years beforehand, then I have to stick to it. You can change your mind down the road as well. But I do want to ask you too, did you have challenges in making the decision? What were they? And, if you did, how did you overcome them?
The challenge that never showed up, but which can for some families, is that I had personally hoped that Mark would make that decision. But by the same token, I wasn't going to strong arm him on it, because that was his decision to make. But I think if the impacted individual, maybe it'd be helpful if they are sitting on the fence about it, to just talk about it. And what are the concerns? What are the things they might be afraid of? Because sometimes it is fear-based. So that didn't occur with us, because Mark embraced the decision, of the brain donation. But I think what could be more typical is other family members, maybe some myths, associated with brain donation, and concerns that may or may not be valid. Mark was not a practicing Catholic, but his family is Catholic. So there was that, in that there were some religious, they weren't obstacles, but they were things that we knew could be of concern to his family. So we saw that as an opportunity to educate them. We directed them to the CurePSP site. We talked to them. We were also ready to set up a conversation with a social worker affiliated with the Neurodegenerative clinic, which could be very helpful. Just, again, educating, informing, and with the thought that the decision had been made. And even if they didn't support it, it was going to happen. But it allowed them to approach this in a way that they felt comfortable after us conversing about it and getting more information about it.
I'm hearing from you about the importance of this open dialogue. So between the two of you and Mark, and getting on the same page, but then also this point of self-advocacy for him to the family and your friends, where you're saying like, hey, this is something that we've decided, and we hope that you can support us, and we'll answer questions about it if you have questions, but just allowing space for people to learn and express their feelings around it.
Absolutely. And that's, I think by kind of having an open door and having conversations and putting the information out there, it makes this very kind of a subject that nobody really wants to talk about. It demystifies it, and it allows it to be open to problem solve, and that can help move the dial forward. Get that collective support from whoever's involved in your village with this disease, the journey of the disease.
Yeah, that's huge. There's stigma and a lot of misconceptions around it, and I think the hardest part of having these conversations, I've learned from my community over the years, is that when you make the decision, you share it with others, you take the steps to set it up, it's this emotional acknowledgement of the reality of the disease. And I think that's like what's really hard for people is like, I don't really want to think about that right now. And then they think about it when the reality kind of sets in, and that's sort of that crisis mode that you were talking about. And so I love that you said demystifying, because if you have that conversation and decision and take the steps and all that early, it gives you time to normalize it, to validate the emotions that come up, to process all of it.
Yes. Yep, absolutely.
So my next question for you is, looking back, and you're 5 years out from it now. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's been 5 years.
That is bizarre to think about. But thinking back on the process, what did you learn through that process, and what would you want to take from that to impart on other people who are considering it now?
I think that I cannot affirm any more strongly how committed I am to the idea of the importance of brain donation, because I think it's important to share clinical results too on a high level. So we did find out, after Mark donated his brain, and there was a pathology report, and there will be a pathology report for anybody who decides to do that, that he had what is called, kind of a classic, a textbook case of PSP, although I know Dr. Kovacs shared there's many iterations of that, okay? But that was huge, because I instantly knew that, through this brain donation process, that talk about a legacy. Mark's brain tissue can be used by vetted scientists globally to work on this disease. I mean, who wouldn't want that after having gone through this process, And really the only way to get an appropriate diagnosis, and that's important for family, is through brain donation. It's just the only way to get a definitive diagnosis. I mean, we did have someone, and Jesse, you know this, someone in the support group who passed from what was thought to be PSP. Well, it wasn't PSP. It was it CBD or MSA?
The particular case you're thinking of ultimately was CBD, but I've had other patients over the years where it's a completely different disease that they found out afterwards.
Right. And it's not really water under the bridge. I mean, because that's helpful information from a research perspective. But for the person who has passed from the disease, and for their family members, this is a legacy that, I mean, there's nothing more powerful to leave, because, I mean, this enables work on the cure, and steps moving that dial forward with the trying to problem solve these very complex, challenging diseases. Yeah.
And it's such a good point. And then I want to bring Dr. Kovacs up, and then we'll continue the conversation. But I want to stress that, what was it that I was going to stress? Oh, that no matter what, if the pathological diagnosis is confirmed as the same clinical diagnosis someone had in life, or it turns out it's something different, there's still something to learn from that. That gives researchers and the neurologists alike really valuable information around how do different abnormal deposition of proteins in the brain manifest themselves symptom-wise when someone's living. And so no matter what, it ultimately helps science. I have another question for you, Diane, but if Dr. Kovacs could rejoin us on the screen, and then we'll get into some of these questions. What was it? Hello, welcome back. What was it like for you, Diane, emotionally to get that report? Because I know that can be very intense for people, family members after the fact.
Yes. It was a little bit of ripping the scab off again, and there is that. I think that's part of grief anyway. I really do. But this is a scientific, very scientific document with extremely detailed data points and information that, once I had some clinical partnering on that, someone like a Dr. Kovacs who would walk through the report with me, and I made my own crib notes to the report, it pulled a veil off on the disease and allowed myself, and this was shared with family members too, to better understand the complexity of the disease, how it was manifested, the areas of the brain that were impacted, and it was extremely valuable. It was, I can't tell you, it was a warm and fuzzy feeling, but it was an important closing of the loop on a very tough journey. And an important one. The report was extremely informative and helpful.
Thank you for sharing that, Diane, and walking us through your experience. And I also just want to acknowledge all the people in the comments in this live webinar right now who are sharing that they chose to donate their brain or that their loved one had donated their brain. And just, thank you all for you all out there who made that decision. Your family member did. I mean, again, amazing contributions and gifts. Dr. Kovacs, I guess to stay on the neuropathology report itself, a question for you. I mean, we've sort of confirmed or answered a question that I had received, which was, can you confirm that the donation actually confirms the actual disease? And it does. Can you speak to sort of what else might be included in a neuropathology report, like what people should expect and sort of what you have in mind when, as the person who's writing that report and sharing it with families?
Yes, thank you very much. And I also want to thank Diane because it was a very helpful summary, how she drove us through her experiences. And so a neuropathology report is always a kind of a medical legal document also. So it has to contain all information that can be sent to any medical institute and they would understand the disease. And of course, it has to be translated to a better understandable way to the relatives. It can be that you go through it with your physician who can translate this, or there is a cover letter which is directed to you, and this offers you the possibility to understand better the report. Or some brain banks such as ours also offer the possibility regularly for the families to discuss any issues with the report, should they have any. Now, the report, of course, first of all, it confirms the diagnosis, as also Diane said, but it also provides a distribution of the pathological alterations in different brain regions. So you might want to understand why your family member behaved like that or had a different symptom than you would have expected from what you read in the internet about PSP. So this is one aspect. It also might show a different type of additional disease, such as an early Alzheimer's disease component or vessel related, so-called vascular blood flow related changes that may have altered the disease duration or may have caused symptoms that were unexpected or did not react to any therapy. And finally, in not few cases, we do see some kind of other disease pathology, which is the background of the clinical symptoms you see. So in PSP, the classical so-called clinically textbook cases, usually we do see the PSP type pathology, but some variations. And we see maybe in some cases a different type of tau protein disease. However, if the symptoms are not kind of classically textbook, you might find a completely unexpected different type of neurodegenerative disease. And then this report is going back also to the clinicians, and they also learn about this. They usually discuss it with their students, with the fellows, to understand. They go back to the clinical files, and the next time a patient comes with a strange symptoms, they will say that, yes, 5 years ago, we saw that and that. And don't forget that in the very near future, we are really going into a stratified medicine. And that means that maybe today we don't have dramatic therapies, but in a few years we will have. And it will be very important already in the clinical level to understand that this disease probably will behave for this therapy and that phenotype or that presentation for another therapy. So the clinicians need a constant learning, because we are discovering so many new aspects in the studying the brains, that we always have to go back and discuss with them and constantly update the knowledge and be prepared for the situation that we can use these individualized therapies.
Yeah, you're speaking to, I believe, precision medicine.
Yes.
There, right? Yeah, yeah. I don't know if this person is watching live right now, but someone in registration had asked a question, just to stay with you for a sec, Dr. Kovacs. My husband's diagnosis is PSP with FTD, so frontotemporal dementia. Will PSP and FTD research both benefit from his brain donation?
Thank you for this very important question. So FTD means a different type of clinical presentation. So it is a behavioral changes or personality changes or problem with the speech and language. So these might be associated with the PSP symptoms, or they might be without the PSP symptoms. And in the microscope, we can see PSP type pathology, or we can see a different type of disease, a different type of protein disease. So obviously it contributes to the understanding of all of the neurodegenerative diseases and supplies information for researchers who are working mostly with this FTD type, which is abbreviation for frontotemporal dementia.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Diane, a question over to you. This was also a question asked during pre-registration. I believe this person's family member is their brother, and they had said, how do I ask my family member to donate their brain? So I know it's a little different from your situation where, you know, your loved one drove the decision, but I guess if it was flipped there, what advice would you have?
I wouldn't actually lead with brain donation, probably, because that's kind of a little bit of a minefield to just put out there. If somebody is not comfortable with the subject to begin with. So, I mean, I think a discussion more around, you know, what are some of the things that are important to that person that they want to be remembered for? You know, what is important to them, you know, with the disease progressing as it is? What kind of a legacy would they like to leave? And that provides kind of an opening to then talk about, you know, and also, you know, what are their views on the value of research moving forward? You know, maybe bringing those two discussion points together, and then that will probably lead to the topic of brain donation. And I think in a lot of cases, providing information, then that's an opening to provide the information through CurePSP. It could be a facilitated discussion between the individual who's impacted and the neurologist or the neurologic social worker, who I've frankly found to be invaluable during this process, you know. So in other words, that you, as a family member, you don't have to be sitting out there on your own. There are typically other resources available to help moderate, pull that discussion forward. But yeah, I wouldn't lead with brain donation, but the whole idea of legacy and the importance of research, so other family members don't have to go through this, you know?
Yeah, it's a good point. Making it a larger conversation around someone's wishes, someone's values, and then meeting them where they are with that. So Okay, let's see. I'm just looking at the questions, and a lot of people are not so much asking questions, just sharing experiences, which I appreciate. So I guess a question, I can also speak to this too, but Dr. Kovacs, I'll share this with you. Someone also during registration had said, what if you want to donate the brain through the CurePSP program and then the body to science? And this particular person had also shared with us that the person with PSP has a different chronic health condition too. So I know that some people will donate to, body or other parts to other tissues to other like tissue donation programs. And then some people will donate like to a local medical school. So can you speak to what that can look like?
I mean, you can definitely do kind of anything that that best serves the science and the legacy. So of course it is allowed. It's just a matter of organization. So then the other centers or other institutes should be involved as early as possible. But then in the pathology department where the body or the brain removal happens should be informed, and then this should not be a problem. And this is a good, if you feel that this helps other aspects of science, this is of course a welcome idea.
And if I could add to that too, with my sort of personal experience with it, I've found that there are some anatomical gifts programs or like body donation programs, such as through a medical school, that will not take, and I'm located in North Carolina, so maybe it's just specific to our area, but because something I do want to stress is like every area, wherever you're tuning in from, different parts of the US, Canada, other places, what resources are available to do this is going to be, and the processes are a little bit different. But here I've had experience with some body donation programs that won't take a body after a brain has been removed. And I've had some that will. So to your point, Dr. Kovacs, making sure that you've asked those questions early, that because there's a lot of coordination that needs to be done at the time, especially if certain tissues go in one place, certain tissues go in another place. So making sure everyone's on the same page, that it's possible, what steps need to be taken.
Exactly.
I just wanted to share something anecdotally too. I mean, I think Mark was an organ donor, but I mean, not that families need to think about this in terms of a hierarchy, but you kind of do. So if, like, in an ideal world, if you're thinking, okay, if brain donation that's the most important thing in terms of the donated organ, for reasons that we've discussed, then the other things like take a second seat. And the reason for that is logistical too, because and Dr. Kovacs, you can highlight this, but I mean, there is a ticking clock in terms of brain donation and the viability of that brain to be harvested. Okay, so that was our biggest concern, was that. And then everything else was like, okay, if that doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But that brain donation has to take place. Whatever else, with that brain donation is key. And so I think it is good for families to say, okay, let's just talk about the reality of that, actually, that at that time, what's going to happen. And because that, I mean, maybe it is just a brain donation. And that's, for us, that was key.
Yeah. And something that I want to make sure that we stress here, because I get this question pretty often, is that this is different from being an organ donor. So like on your license or wherever, if you've chosen to be an organ donor, that's usually speaking to live tissue donation. Or, if your brain's not working anymore, but other tissues can be used to help somebody else who's living, that's usually what that's speaking to. Whereas this is different. This is just to be used for science. So if you've signed up as an organ donor, that doesn't mean that you're going to have your brain donated through this kind of program. So I do want to acknowledge that we are at time, but there's a few other, I want to make sure we speak to the process a little bit more. So quick check-in, Dr. Kovacs and Diane, if we go over 5-10 minutes, does that work for you? Is that okay? Okay. So, and if people need to sign off because of that, I completely understand, but I want to make sure that we have time because this is a complicated process. There's so much that we could cover here. So let's talk about the process itself a little bit. Some people have, there's different reasons someone chooses not to donate their brain. And a question that we receive quite often, including for this webinar, was, is there an impact on traditional funerals with an open casket? I've had people express a concern that you might be able to see the incisions from a brain donation. And so Dr. Kovacs, can you speak to that?
It's a very important question, and it is very important that you understand that everything is done that your feelings are not hurt in this way. So the brain removal the method of brain removal always preserves the whole skin area, if I might say it like that, of the face and the whole head. So it is a very special and very careful method. So it should not be seen or should not have any effect on this type of funerals.
Yeah, great, thank you. Again, kind of getting a little bit more into the process, and people are asking about this in the comment section as well. So someone had asked how they get step-by-step instructions for setting up brain donation and what needs to happen at the time of someone's passing in order to coordinate it. And I'll just speak to that to say that if you go to our brain donation packet, which we dropped the link in the comments, you can find it on our website. I did update this packet about this time last year, and I used the common questions that I get and the advice that we often give to people. I tried to be as clear as possible in there on the step-by-step instructions. So what you need to fill out, where it needs to go, what needs to be set up now when you're setting it up, at the time that someone is passing. So I don't really want to go through it just because it takes time, but I would encourage you all who are considering this to read through that packet. And then if you still have questions on the process and the steps, let us know and we'll help you as much as possible. We've had a few people ask about what other, as part of the steps, what advanced preparations are needed in order to set this up. And a few people, even in the comments today, are asking, how do you find the person to do the brain, what we call the brain tissue procurement? So that's doing the removal of it and then shipping it to the brain bank. And if I could speak to that, it's just that it depends, which is not a fun answer, but it really just depends on where you live. And I would say it is probably the hardest part of the process itself, in that there might be someone at your local hospital who can do it. There might be a private pathologist or what's called a diener, someone who is like a tech who helps in pathology, who is able to do it, or that resource might not be available in your area, and you might need to travel to find that person, or they might need to travel to you. So what we've done, so right now, all of the brain tissue donated through CurePSP goes to the Mayo Clinic Brain Bank in Jacksonville, Florida. They have a brain donation coordinator there named Rachel, who maintains a list of pathologists and dieners they've worked with all over the country and beyond. And so when you set up brain donation and you send the paperwork that's needed to them, she'll then speak with you and say, here's names of pathologists or dieners in your area we've worked with. And then I've written in that packet of what questions you need to ask that person in order to set this up. So I'll just pause on that and just say, do either of you want to add anything to what I've said so far about the process?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I would say the actual event, okay, with the passing of the individual, and then the wheels are in motion for the brain donation. That is not the time to be cobbling together and looking for documents, because you're not going to be in a good mental place to do that. I don't care how together you are as an individual. So with that being the case, I would say prepare for maybe some hiccups, and hopefully none of that will ever happen. So what that means is making sure you have physical, tangible documents with all the approval forms, the consent forms, everything related to the brain donation, have it ready in a go bag. Okay, those are the tangible documents. In addition to that, this is part of the dotting your I's and crossing your T's. In advance, make sure all those electronic documents are sent to all the involved parties. The neurology team. In our case, there's a part of Duke University called Decedent Care. They got it. Also, we had it on hand. We had other family members, who are part of our support team. They all had copies of this. And then to have electronic copies as well, and make sure those electronic copies are accessible to any of the involved parties. Because unfortunately, sometimes one silo in the healthcare system doesn't have it and the other one does. And when it's electronic, they can share that data. And then, by the way, you already have those hard copy documents, because at the 11th hour, you're not in a position to try to go find all that stuff. You're just, it's just being, part of that is just being really ultra prepared, ahead of time.
Hospice, most people in our community pass away under the care of hospice. Not everyone, but a lot of people do. And hospice, having them on board with it, and they're huge in helping to coordinate this at the time too. They're one of the parties that you should inform and then have on your side as you're navigating it in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm just going to go through these other things kind of quickly. So I just wanted, looking also at questions I'd gotten during registration. So I want to note that the process might be a little bit different if someone passes away in the home versus if they're in a hospice facility versus in a hospital. Sometimes when it's in a hospital, it's a little bit more streamlined just because that person does not need to travel usually for the pathologist or DNR to do the brain tissue procurement. There's a little bit more coordination if someone is in a facility or in a home, because they need to be transported to a different place where that procedure is going to take place. And you mentioned the time frame of it also. So there is a window. And actually, Dr. Kovacs, can you speak to that? When somebody passes, what is the window of time till you have to remove that within?
Yes. So ideally, it is removed as soon as possible. So all these complicated type of methodologies are the best if it is as soon as possible. Usually this would be between 6 and 24 hours. So this is the ideal situation. The number of examination and the quality of the examination decreases beyond 48 hours.
Yep. Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much. And so with that, I'll also add, because a lot of people ask about this, what happens if someone passes away when the pathologist is not available at that moment or within a few hours to do the procedure. And so with that, I'd say when you're setting this up, speak to, if you've arranged a mortuary service or a funeral home, or if it's happening in a hospital and you could bring hospice into this too. Sometimes someone could be a body. I know this is all funky stuff to talk about, but let's just, be real about it, right? So a body might need to be held in cold storage so the head is kept cold up until the time of the brain tissue procurement. So that might be something you need to ask and kind of arrange beforehand if they can't do that, the procedure can't happen immediately, and if there's a cost associated with it. Another question that we received, so I'm only going to share these last two, and then we'll wrap up here. Someone had asked, are there financial responsibilities for the family? And I hope that you all are okay if I'm answering some of these, but I just want to say that sometimes there are. It depends. Some hospitals do not charge, or a pathologist might not charge anything to do this procedure and to ship it to the brain bank, and some might. There's no standardization or real regulation around that right now. So I've had people where pathologists, it's $0, especially if they were a patient of that hospital. And I've also seen it over $2,000. So that's one of those questions that you want to ask beforehand. And I've written this in the packet. Ask beforehand and have a good sense of that so that you're financially prepared when the time comes. But with that, I'll say part of the CurePSP program is that right now we're able to reimburse families up to $1,000 of incurred related expenses. So that might be a pathologist fee to do the procedure. It might be body transportation. It might be holding in cold storage, whatever needed to happen in order to, make to donate the brain. If you keep receipts from that, you submit it to us after, we're happy to reimburse you up to $1,000. And then the last question, which is a question for you, Dr. Kovacs, we recognize that right now our brain tissue is shipped to Mayo Clinic, and our current program supports brain donations in the United States, but this is important everywhere else in the world too. So what if someone's living in Canada and they want to donate their brain because you're in Canada?
Yes, so with the support of CurePSP and with our so-called ROSI Center for PSP Research, we indeed opened up for Canada-wide brain donations for PSP and related conditions. Currently, until this lecture, it is Toronto and the Greater Toronto area. But as I said, now we, thanks for the support of CurePSP, we are able to go beyond this area, and now we started to contact the movement disorder specialists around the country, and they will then inform their patients about this possibility.
Thank you. We're excited about that, to be able to expand the program that way. So I would say that if you live in Canada currently, reaching out to Dr. Kovacs and his team to figure out what that looks like, and more to come on that as well. So I know we've gone over, I have a few words I'd like to share with people before we close out today. Any last words of wisdom from either of you? Anything we didn't cover that you want to make sure you say?
I just want to emphasize my appreciation and acknowledgement, and I can think only of all of you who are listening, and I know that this is always a very difficult thing, but I'm sure that you will get to the right decision, and it will help you to get through this or close the loop, as Diane mentioned. Really appreciate that you joined, and I wish you all the best.
Yeah, I echo that completely.
Wonderful. Thank you both. This was such a valuable conversation. You shared so much, and I know that this is only the tip of the iceberg of this very complicated and very important subject, but I'm so honored to, have had this opportunity to learn from you and to be able to hopefully provide information that's really applicable, and I know it is, to our audience here. So thank you both for being with us today. Thank you to everyone who's watching, interacting, submitting questions. If we didn't get to your question today, or there's other ways that we can support you, I encourage you to email us again at info@curepsp.org. We'll do our best to get you an answer or connect you with the right resource from there. I know we're a little over, but if you could hang tight for one more minute, I want to quickly share some exciting upcoming events at CurePSP. So one is brand new for you. We haven't announced this with anyone yet. It just fresh on our website as of yesterday, I think. We're starting an interactive monthly music therapy group. It's led by two amazing neurologically specialized music therapists from the CurePSP Center of Care at Johns Hopkins University. The first meeting is going to be on Wednesday, August 9th. So that'll be a really cool new asset and resource for us, and hopefully for you all as well. The other big one is that we hope to see you in Orlando, Florida, September 20th and 21st for our next Fall Family Conference. It'll be hosted in partnership with the CurePSP Centers of Care in Florida, University of Florida, and University of South Florida. And it'll be a really special opportunity to learn and to connect. And it would be fantastic to get to meet you in person, in real life, in 3D, and not just looking at a screen. If you're not able to attend in person, though, we will be having a virtual version of it on October 31st and November 2nd. Our next Ask the Expert webinar will be on September 28th, so mark your calendars for that. And the topic will be the ins and outs of research for PSP, CBD, and MSA, led by our very own Associate Director of Scientific Affairs and Partnerships, Dr. Jennifer Brummett. You'll be able to find information for all of those on our website, which is, as you all probably know, www.curepsp.org. And lastly, as always, important to highlight that we're able to offer these webinars and all of our resources and services because of your support of CurePSP's mission to raise awareness, build community, improve care, and find a cure for PSP, CBD, and MSA. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Talk soon.